How many times have you heard a phrase like this? Well, actually, let me put up a photo to make this more accurate coming out of my mouth. This generation of players is so soft, it isn't like the 90s when real men played the game. Or some shit like that. I'm sure you've heard it before, probably from your grandpa or some old head on Twitter. You hear things like that on clips where dudes are flopping, acting like it was never a thing until recently. It isn't a new thing. If you want to say it's more prevalent, sure, but it's nothing new. You also see it in some fake scuffle that isn't an actual fight, because apparently it makes you soft, and it makes this generation of basketball players weak if you don't want to fight during a basketball game. My response to that is, if you want to watch a fight, why don't you just watch the MMA? I mean, to each their own, but don't call players soft because they don't want to get into a fist fight during a basketball game. And certainly don't say that this basketball is not real because they're not fighting. Real basketball is a ball going through a hoop, not a fist going into a face. But the time when you see NBA fans, specifically older ones, complain about this generation of basketball players, it's when a superstar signs with a new team or is traded to a new team per their request. Among all the complaints about softness, the biggest complaint from older generations of NBA fans is about player loyalty. And as much as I can disagree with the flopping and fighting thing, I can't disagree that players are less loyal than they used to be. Look at these photos. These are the 2017 All-Star teams. Over 60% of these players have changed teams. There is no question that loyalty isn't too common in the NBA these days. Loyalty definitely isn't anywhere close to what it used to be, and I have a theory on why.
Rebound. Save. Absolutely incredibly with the acrobatic alley-oop.
Loyalty is one of those things in basketball that is not defined by a statistic. So because of that, all of this shit is subjective. Everything we talk about will not be solidified by fact. That's why it's a theory. Again, no, that joke's way too easy. So loyalty in the NBA, as said in the intro, has become less and less common, in contrast to the 90s where plenty of NBA superstars were staying on the same team for decades. Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, drafted in the mid-90s going into the 2000s, Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan, and Dirk Nowitzki. There was also Reggie Miller in the 90s, but Reggie never was a superstar. Don't even try to disagree with me there. A superstar would at least make the All-NBA second team once within an 18-year career. And prior to the 90s, players were even more loyal. A good amount of that was because of limitations on free agency, but there was also a culture around competing, and the mindset on that competition was, this is my team, I will win with my team. Whereas now the motivation just seems to be winning with or without a team, and it also is money. The lack of financial motivations in the earlier days of the NBA also had a lot to do with much smaller player salaries. Now, the main culprit for this change to me is social media. These changes in loyalty and player movement seem to have happened in the last decade or so. Now, what in our society has become more and more prevalent in everyone's lives over the past decade? Social media. It's been said a million times that social media has a big impact on society and most people's mental health. It constantly puts negativity in front of you that your brain just straight up is not built to process on a consistent basis, but social media forces you to process it. Even if you aren't big on social media, it can still impact your life. Because of that, I have tried to quit Twitter multiple times, to no avail. As far as I've been able to go is turning off all notifications, besides for Woj. And I think social media has vastly changed how players are criticized. As much as I love NBA Twitter, there are many negative sides to it as well. Especially if you're a player. Even more so if you are a superstar and even a player with all-time great potential. If you are that good, you're also going to get criticized a lot. The better you are, the more hated you are. That is just a fact. And when you are really damn good, your legacy not only matters to you, but it matters to NBA fans. Now in the 90s through 50s, your legacy wasn't something that people talked about as much, at least not in the moment. In retrospect, legacies were talked about plenty, but in the actual moment, it wasn't that big of a deal. In the 90s, there were sports talk shows, sure, but when you compare and contrast those days versus now, it's day and night. In the 90s, you had sports talk shows, there were articles written about you in the paper, you might see some signs from fans in the crowd, but that's about it. Today, if you are an NBA player on Twitter and all of the other much worse social medias, you are exposed to millions of people giving their opinions on you and your legacy. I'm not saying that legacy wasn't something that was important to players of the past. I just think because they didn't have to deal with it being constantly brought up on social media, it wasn't constantly in the back of their head. Let's say you're Kevin Durant. He is the prime example after all. Let's say you're KD, you just lost Game 7 to the Golden State Warriors in 2016 and it was mostly your fault. You were 28 years old in the prime of your career, you are one of the most lethal scorers the league has ever seen, if not the most lethal, and you are one of the NBA's best players, but you still have not won a championship. You go home after the game, lay down in bed, and open up Twitter to see thousands of notifications and tweets about how you haven't won shit, you never will win shit, and you're not shit. You look at thousands of people that night, and probably hundreds of thousands to millions on Twitter over the next couple of months, call you trash. The nicest thing that you would hear from anyone but stans would be that you will be the best player to never win a championship, which is basically a consolidation prize at best. So if you are Kevin Durant and feeling like the world is on your ass about your legacy, you feel this constant pressure from not only the media that players experienced in the past, but also you get a direct line from the fans. Now some might say there are many fans out there that root for Kevin Durant and give him positive feedback, and that is true, but I can tell you from personal experience that even if the feedback is 99% positive, you're gonna mostly remember that 1% negative. I don't think about comments too often, more than a couple of minutes after I've read them, but when I do think about them for a while, it's usually the negative comments, even though I get mostly positive feedback. And from Durant's perspective, I would guess the positive negative was 50-50 in 2016 after that series, and after signing with Golden State, probably 95% negative, so that was a little bit counterintuitive. But you might say, oh well, there is a particular superstar who doesn't pay a whole lot of attention to social media who just left his team in free agency, that superstar obviously being Kawhi Leonard. I mean, the dude only follows Wingstop, the Spurs for some reason, Jamal Crawford, and 3 other accounts. But as I said earlier, even if you're not a big social media guy, it has an impact on your life. If you have millions of people saying something about you, with a platform to make sure the world hears it, you're gonna hear about it. And if you need any evidence that Kawhi Leonard is aware and lives with social media having an influence in his life, look no further than this clip.
And have fun with it. Ha ha ha.
Kawhi's laugh was all that NBA Twitter could talk about for a week, and it's still very prevalent today. Like it or not, if you are just a normal person, social media impacts your life. Now imagine how it impacts you if you have millions of fans and millions of haters. The constant presence of social media has had an impact on players. It impacts them every day. Players these days are constantly in their heads due to the effects of social media, and I do not think that was something that existed quite as much, or if at all, in the 90s and decades prior. And that doesn't make players today soft, it just means they live a different experience than players of the 90s. So sorry old heads, that doesn't make them soft. Kevin Love brilliantly explained why that is the case.
But there are players out there that think you're soft because you did this. They think DeMar's soft. They're gonna think everybody that comes forward is soft. What do you say to them?
Like, it's such a tired statement. Like, I've put my time in this league. Guys put their time in this league. To be in the NBA, you're not soft. And to come forward with this, it's, like I said, that's tired, it's outdated, and it actually, in the end, is probably, for me, it was the best thing I did.
Now, many people believe that LeBron James sparked this era of player movement, and to an extent that is true, especially because Kevin Durant said the whole reason he felt okay going to the Warriors is because of LeBron's move to South Beach. However, I feel like that was just a domino effect from the pressure LeBron was feeling in the late 2000s when social media was really becoming prevalent. LeBron was one of the most hyped players ever, and he was expected to be nothing less than phenomenal, and he was expected to be a multiple-time champion. So after 7 years with the Cleveland Cavaliers, with him seeing no way to win consistently with the roster that he had, he felt the need to make a drastic move to help boost his legacy. Now, we can sit here and debate how much value a player's rings have after a move like that. I actually did a whole video on Kevin Durant's rings, but regardless, I think it's pretty clear that just doing nothing wasn't going to do a whole lot. You can at least admire them for taking action. So if there is a lesson here, it is that social media has an impact on everyone's lives, including the lives of NBA players and NBA superstars. Players' legacies are constantly being questioned by thousands of people inside of a tiny screen in the pocket of every NBA superstar. And all of that criticism is just a click away. So if you are one of these people that hates on player movement, at least don't be a part of the problem. I don't care about player movement, so I'm going to keep making jokes on NBA Twitter. Sorry. But that is my theory on why loyalty is dead in the NBA. But that is just a theory, a game theory. I'm sorry. I had to make the joke. That's the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.